Let's ask the Lord to bless the day. Dear Lord, we're thankful. Beautiful day, good company. We'd ask that we would be pursuing the thoughts we need to form our direction in life with our children. In your Son's name, amen. Now, yesterday we were talking about the aroma of true religion and wanting you to at least be encouraged, reading through the passages that we suggested, that you watch out for supplanting true religion with religion, and that you actually, you might say, craft what you see in the scriptures the Lord wants you to be, and not willing to have other authorities come in and decide what you're going to be religiously. If you agree with them, great. But if you don't, you want to be sure you're not sacrificing your children on the altar of some Methodist, or I don't know, it could be worse, a Lutheran, I suppose. That is sort of our basic idea, since we're trying to transfer your image to your children conscientiously and consciously, that you pick up the right questions to resolve. You say, I have to resolve me to some degree as to what I'm illustrating for my children, my own devotion to Christ. And do I understand what I'm doing? That's another big one. And by the time you get to your children's teenage years, you will be pretty roundly convinced that you don't understand what you're doing. And so we want to prepare you for that so that you actually come across really hip, really cool by the time you have that obligation. The second talk, first for today, and it's not really long, it's nowhere near as long as the last one, is the need for a true adult. Something is missing in America, and something is, the blame could be cast on the Founding Fathers, the blame could be cast on what we have done with those political doctrines, which have had their benefits. We've had a pretty sweet run as a nation because of certain elements. We were arguing this morning at Drones. I've already been through 2 hours of argument this morning, fresh as a daisy. We were arguing at the end of the evening about end of the morning session about the rightness or wrongness of the American Revolution. We have that in our national myth, and you celebrate the 4th of July, eat hot dogs, and wave the flag. Now, one of the things we don't consider is whether or not the civic ideas we hold dear are actually doing something to us that has slowly but surely enervated the strength you have as a parent. Because I know you all want to be monarchs, and I recommend it. But we often have ourselves at war with those conscious distinctions of social standing. Now, when we say a true adult, we know that there are qualities you have. You're an adult and you're a parent, both of which are dignities of standing. And those are things that you need to know what you're saying when you say it, and what you should expect from it, and not having it and not expecting from it costs you, and what does it cost you in your relationship with your children. We have this example on page 12. The first paragraph or so is a quote from Luke 7, and it's where Christ is talking to the Roman centurion about healing his servant. And the centurion says down in verse 7, I did not presume to come to you, but say the word and let my servant be healed. For I am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the multitude that followed him, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. And all the guy had done is says, I'm a military man. I do what I'm told. And I do tell things to people, and they do it because they were told. Now, the reason it works in the military, and I don't know how many of you have been in the military. I was in the U.S. Navy for 4 years, and they had a way of making you do things. And mostly, it was not because they had a direct threat of punishment. We'll paste you in the jaw unless you, we will spank you unless you, we will fine you unless you. You had no consciousness of that. You saw the number of stripes on the man's sleeve, and you popped to attention like an idiot and saluted. He just had scrambled eggs on his brim, and he was more important than you. Now, because what did the stripes mean? What did the scrambled eggs mean? Well, it meant he was a commanding officer. Meant that you owed him a salute. And it was natural to have this automatic, out of modern American, I mean, when we went in, and a lot of hippies in boot and all got their hair shaved off. And it's amazing, the military, it's like the military should be in charge of your child rearing for about, 9 weeks. They will crush the spirit of your children. They will make them into a new man, a killing machine. But we did what we were told. People who had been, take it to the man, march against the war, suddenly were at boot camp and we're almost weeping ourselves to sleep every night because we didn't know what was going on. We were so surprised. Christ marvels at this guy, and he calls it faith. I've found greater faith. This guy is so used to upper and lower. Now, when we were young in our ministry, in terms of being people actually asking us to say things, we were asked down to Boise many, many years ago, probably when Taylor was not existent. Might have been.
She might have been a baby.
Might have been a baby.
Probably.
We were asked by some parents in Boise to come down and do a short session on child rearing. It wasn't a full day and a half. And we were thinking about it, and we were wondering what we were missing. The reason they were calling us is that a lot of them had come through Moscow, U of I, and were raising families, and it was beginning to become evident that it wasn't working. And they were applying the regime of Moscow. They were loving their children and disciplining their children, and still, as the child grew up, they got more and more insubordinate. And sometimes these parents were spanking far more than we ever did. And you could tell the spanking stung, there's that element, but there was something missing. And this is what, as we processed our way through this, what was lacking in their pastoring their home. And it was this idea that Americans have drifted away from, that there is any class distinction between parent and child. Too often it's just that we're older, we're bigger, we'll be in charge until we're not bigger anymore. And that's how a lot of kids end up viewing it. They see, by the time I'm as tall as father, I don't have to do what he says. Because it's revealing it's revealing something about their beliefs and your own, that you never treated yourself as an adult and as a parent as a higher human being, a better human being than your children. This is all rooted in, at least behind the scenes, the nature of what makes you humane or human at all. That you are human to the degree you govern yourself. That's what, and it's gradient, and it's a degree of your government. So you know that when you're in some place where you're rubbing elbows with people who have no government of themselves, or you go to prison or something like that, or Walmart, And you'll see people that came out of the mountains like there was no government at all on their attire. I mean, women who should not be wearing that little are. He said, God, Jesus loves them. Christ died for them. They might even be church folk. But they're struggling with their humanity because they do not adequately govern themselves. And you're civilized to the degree you live in a governed society. And you are noble to the degree you're of governing service to it. The government of things is an avenue of betterment. You are governors of your children. You have to believe that to be true for the emotional communication of your height comes across to your child. And I have this section out of Abolition of Man on the first page there, where Lewis talks about, right here at the beginning, until quite modern times, all teachers and even all men believed that the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could either be congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive, but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. Now, we're not saying that you should be giving this lecture to your children, but we're suggesting that what you hear in this section about your adulthood and your parenthood, that you have standing, that when you believe you have standing, and it is actual in the cosmos that you do, God has granted it to you by giving you a baby, that will communicate to your children. Remember, your children are trying to figure you out and doing a really good job. If they figure out that you're like a god in this house, or you're like the king, not because you're saying, damn it, I'm the king, because then they look at you like a fool. But if they start to pick up that you are like the king, or that you're functioning, breathing air that is so more rarefied than their own, they discipline themselves. All you have to do is find the worst behaved, teenager who doesn't obey their parents at all. Take them to a concert of the person they like the most and get them backstage passes. And it's like Wayne's World. We are not worthy. We are not worthy. They will bow down. They will discipline themselves when they believe they're in the presence of their better. That's it. If they believe it's a situation that is better than they, if they don't think it, like of a young thug goes to the library and who is this that says we can't make noise in the library? We're going to take it to the man. Well, there are people who don't believe that they're in a better situation, but other times suddenly you become very reverent, very conscious of your behavior, very self-guided, if you believe you're in the presence of your better. Now, understanding what makes better is important. It's not just rank assigned. It's not that this guy somehow stumbled into a parcel of uniforms that had more stripes on the sleeve. But as we go at this, one of the things, I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan, and so
Evan, before you
Yes.
move on, also, your child will notice if you aren't better, and I think this happens more with women dealing with sons, that they become a little bit weak and they don't deal with their sons or their children with a strong sense of I'm better than you, and the kids can run all over the mom, and then dad comes home and has to fix everything. So I'm encouraging the women right now to change your attitude about how you deal with your kids. Don't think of yourself as a softie.
But don't become, the word.
Oh yeah, that other word.
That we should not use too much. But engage your inner Harry Thunderer. Now the kids will misread that a lot of times. But a mother that is strong, like a Proverbs 31 sort of woman, she has girded herself with strength. This is not a a China doll looking to get the approval of her girlfriends. You got to get these kids. We've run into little boys just disobeying their mothers on principle, and they will say, "You're just a woman," to their mothers. Well, the heavens and earth should have fallen on them, and they begin to realize. And this is where husbands have to be. We were talking a bit about this. What was it, John? Fathers that careless or not involved. You've got to protect this in your wife with your kids. My dad generally did all the spankings after he came home. My mother didn't want to have to do them, and she would just tell us, "Well, I'll be telling your father about this when he gets home," and ruin the rest of the day. And my father would tell us, you don't treat your mother this way. You don't make life difficult. I'm at work and you're at home with the mother. You're not going to make your mother's life difficult. Accentuating the growth of this kind of informal, in the background, it's true about the universe. The universe has merited standing of authority and betterment that we don't talk about in our society because we're an egalitarian, fiction. We are pretending you all deserve one vote, and we know better. But we're not going to be trying to announce it, because remember, where it is most named, it is the most absent. You don't want to be throwing your weight around like, "I'm in charge here," and so forth. That protesteth too much. You want to live in the truth of your authority. Know that you're protecting it, and authority and height. It should be shocking to you that, we did this with our kids, and at a certain point, the sense of humor in the family decides to broach. Every so often, Davis will call Mother Leslie. When he's being oldest son correcting his mom, where he goes, "Leslie, I think you need to calm down." And it's funny. We all have a good laugh because he's 40-something. But I remember one of my younger sons, we won't mention which one, at the table, decided this was the time he was going to say something a little too informal to his father. I think it involved my first name. And all it took was me looking at him going, "I don't think you want to be talking to your father that way." And it just collapsed. It fell to pieces because he knew he was hoping for the comedy, and it was probably too soon, too young. Don't want to start that little habit. But you've got to have that belief in your height. You believe you're better. They believe you're better. It helps, you might say, lay a groundwork of discipline. They control themselves. And sometimes it's just a word from you that lets them know they overstepped. Now, Lewis has a lot on this. I mentioned that I have this up on page 13, a little boxed quote from Preface to Paradise Lost. I know that you might not be interested in Paradise Lost, but Lewis's work on it is tremendous. It's a short book. Get yourself a copy. If nothing else, for the chapter on hierarchy. There's a chapter just discussing this concept in the ancient world, and Lewis argues a lot on the basis of it. And he said, basically, if you don't understand this, you won't understand things written before a certain year. This thought is not peculiar to Milton. It belongs to the ancient orthodox tradition of European ethics from Aristotle to Johnson himself. And a failure to understand it entails a false criticism not only of Paradise Lost, but of nearly all literature before the Revolutionary period. It may be called the hierarchical conception. According to this conception, degrees of value are objectively present in the universe. Everything except God has some natural superior. Everything except unformed matter has some natural inferior. The goodness, happiness, and dignity of every being consists in obeying its natural superior and ruling its natural inferiors. When it fails in either part of this twofold task, We have disease or monstrosity in the scheme of things until the peccant being is either destroyed or corrected. One or the other it will certainly be, for by stepping out of its place in the system, whether it step up like a rebellious angel or down like an uxorious husband, it has made the very nature of things its enemy. It cannot succeed. We have a matrix that you live in, that God has structured the universe on, where archangels are higher than angels, and parents are higher than children. And people who revolt against this in some sort of way, even if they did so by mere picking up osmotically the teachings of the age, and none of the Christians think it's wrong to have this teaching of the age, that you're all equal, that equality starts to bring your decisions as parent into question. Who are you to say? Why do you have more votes than I do? Well, why don't you ever listen to me? Why don't you ever do it my way? Now, we know also at the same time that I have some passages here that we just sort of skipped over about Christ talking about being the servant of all. We have structures that are needed for institutions that have the hierarchies in place. You then have applied humilities that aren't the destruction of the hierarchies, but you might say the voice of the hierarchies. When Christ washes the feet of the disciples, and they're just horrified, Peter's horrified, and he's their master, he's their rabbi, and he says, yes, I am your master and Lord. He affirms that. I am your master, I am in charge of you, and I'm your Lord, I'm in charge of you. And if I do this, how much more should you? A mother has great opportunities of service for her children. And there's one thing between a harried mother who is in debt to her children, that she must do all that the children require of her, or a woman who serves her children and the decisions that she makes about their life. She's changing diapers, for heaven's sake. You can't get more low than this. And but you have to stop and say, okay, where does this idea go? What is the benefit of it? It says your lordship realizes you're dealing with an immature creature that you've got to care for in ways that creature doesn't realize, and it will seem like you're a servant to their every whim, but it's to their every need. Excuse me. I think I have that passage there in John 13 on page 13. Now, when you teach, one of the reasons I want you to think about this is there are theories of family. I'm not a patriarchal fan, okay? Because I think that too many people really want to be patriarchs. They want to be first among things because they're jerks, and they want to be in charge of other people, way other people are. They want people doing, it's part of the pride of life. We all want to extend our will, and some people like the teaching about, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as to the Lord. And why are the men clapping? It's not even written to them. But there's some men who really like to hear that, There are parents who like to hear they're really in charge of their kids. You got to watch out for them, because you should accept being first, because the acceptance rather than really want to be first. It is the way you are, not how much you really want it. Because sometimes when people really want something that they really should have, but they really want it. The problem is them really wanting it. And they end up being difficult players in the circumstance. I have a little note that says, lords are needed, but we ought not need to be lords. You gotta have government. You gotta have people in charge. But somebody who, there was a movie starred Ray Liotta, I think Ray Liotta, I forget the name of it, about a prison, island prison, and they just dropped people off the coast of California at this prison, and the prisoners just fought it out, and they're having a meeting of the leaders of the various gangs in this hut, and the various gang leaders go in there, and then one gang leader comes out and he throws 4 heads down the steps and says, "I really like being in charge." Some people really like being in charge, and some people will seize charge. You've been appointed. You have had your way with a woman, and she got preggers, and those are your kids. You named them, and you've got this obligation that is handed to you, and if you misuse the privilege, bad things will happen in your child rearing. If you use it well, wonderful things happen in your child rearing. The humility of things is, this is the sort of the ground where your own children. One of the things you should ask yourself broadly, across the board regarding child rearing, is when am I going to teach my child humility, and how am I going to teach my child humility? Because it's really big. As a proto-virtue, it is the ground of you efficiently loving people without you popping up and demanding attention from you. Because humility allows yourself, meekness allows yourself to not be all that. And it's not you fighting Jesus Christ about what you do with your time, because you're humble about you. And your kids become servants to each other, their siblings, servants to you, because they're not all about themselves. So you want to have the question, how are we going to teach them humility? Now, an obvious thing, you say, well, this is clear, Evan. You yell at them and demean them for about 13 years. And then they'll, walk away with the right attitude. That's what people think. I think that's what the military thought. They yelled at you and demeaned you. You were not even human in their mind. At least they talked to you that way. But that was not life we were leading. It was just a job. We were being demeaned to be good slaves for the U.S. government. We're not trying to achieve being down on yourself, but not being about yourself. So if you want the likeness in something, you say, first I clarify, what is the thing I want in my kids? And it's humility, not down on themselves, but not about themselves, where they're able to be setting themselves aside without a big concern. It's not that big a deal. It's just me. Well, that means that you want them to see that in you, because you want to be the image that they become. And so consequently, when the Roman centurion said, "I am one set under authority." So when a father shows up and wants to come across the little Johnny like little Johnny needs, you don't start with, "You are under my authority. You do what I say in this house." You say, "No, I am one set under authority. God is above me. My boss is above me. The U.S. government is above me. And yeah, you have got lords, and they need to see you, because if they're going to image you in humility, they've got to see you not submitting to them. If you're not going to submit to them, well, be humble before me, Dad. Well, no, I'll be humble in front of you to my lords. I have others set above me, and you're set below me. You will see how humility works. You'll see how obedience works by how, you might say, godly your own treatment. If you're always going on with it doesn't take much, like this morning, to have someone suggest that the American Revolution was anything but God's purposes and history. I don't know what your view is. I'm not a big fan of it. I read Romans 13. And, but we many times cannot absorb what we're asking our children to absorb. You want them to realize that you are their better. You need this lordship in order to teach humility. And it's got its own quirkinesses. You're going to be residual lordship later on. You're going to grow out. they're going to graduate. The humility you have will prepare you for that graduation, especially, we've run into moms and such that weren't ready for little kids leaving home. In their mind, it's my baby at 17 going to state college, and how could this happen? How could I go on? We should have known learning that this government is going to end. I had a counseling situation. Again, I get a lot of phone calls from people that decided somewhere in the United States there's someone who will talk to me about this. And this is a few years ago, and a daughter was reaching that 16, out and about, driving, a little insubordinate, little I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it sort of thing. Why can't you let me have, more time? So I was talking to the parents and said, look, what you do is you congratulate her, say, thank you, it's good to see this. This is where you're supposed to be. You are supposed to be grasping after authority in your own life, because in a couple of years you will be an authority in your own life. And we want to see this quality where you want it. We're going to raise your allowance as a reward for this transition, because you need more money to spend. And the parents were a little flipped out because they were thinking the reverse. We got to crush this rebellion. We got to send the troops in, bring this into good order. Say, no, the nature of your lordship is it's temporary. It's going to wane, and you've got to be ready to humbly accept it, and then accept it humbly with the authority of making the arrangement. Said, you're going to talk to your daughter about how this is good to see in her, but she's got to remove the insubordination. We agree with her needing more personal guidance in her own life, and we agree so much we're going to fund it. But you're not going to talk sass to your mother. This is not what you get to do. You don't, and because suddenly the wisdom of Solomon has come to her, she views you as Solomon. Now, I don't know if you've read That Hideous Strength, when Jane Studdock first meets Ransom, and she almost gets the hots for, she gets the hots for him, because suddenly she's aware of height and dominance, lordship, a kingly presence. And she was a woman who's having a hard time with her husband. It wasn't equal, and things were not being, and all of a sudden she becomes a Stepford wife mentally, because she encountered real lordship. When you encounter the real thing, the real responses start to happen. And Leslie, you had a point here about...
It doesn't seem like it's working in that well with what you're saying, but it's just the idea that your children are supposed to grow up, and a lot of mothers love the baby stage, and when they see their children starting to grow up and become more independent, they bemoan that. But that's kind of sick, because if your child never really grew up, there'd be something seriously wrong. So you need to look at every stage as something wonderful that has good things about it, and capitalize on that.
And I think that when we don't, those that we are trying to be lords over and servants to, you're lords over your children, servants to your children. If we could afford servants, we always wanted Andrew to be the butler here at the house, because I could yell Bates really easily. And he would shimmer in, and Bates and Haynes. Haynes doesn't register very well, but you don't want to have servants that are, you've assigned them to your children that do what your children tell them. You want servants that do what you tell them for your children. We are servants of one another, not to do what the other person wants. And the modern view of love, the modern view of, oh, you don't love me unless you affirm me, agree with me, do what I want. And that's what the kids will tell you at some point. I don't know where they pick it up. You don't love me, you don't let me, you don't say that I'm right in this, you don't support me in this. That is a, I mean, it's easily disproved, but sometimes parents get a little confused. They don't realize that obviously the child doesn't love you because they're not doing what you want, oddly enough. That's what started this whole thing. So let's talk about your lack of love for your parents. But we are bringing a gratification to their need because we're in charge of their life, because they need someone in charge of their life. The maturity we're shooting for, the thing we're trying to exchange to, is when the necessary government of life resides in the self. That you send your kid out as a self. They're a self real early, like one. But they become a functional, capable self by a certain point if you did your job. But that's where the maturity happens, when the necessary level of government occurs inside themselves. You don't have to be there. You want to be able to walk away from your children knowing they don't have to obey you anymore, but they're definitely going to honor you. You honor your parents. You will always honor your parents. That is something that this process gains you the ability to say, yes, you can make your own decisions. You married your own wife. You're producing your own kids. You live in St. Louis. God bless you. I hope it works out with this new job. And they view you with honor, though there's no expectation of obedience anymore. A woman who gets married doesn't call her dad up when her husband says we're moving to St. Louis to ask him, her dad, if she can move to St. Louis, because she's got to get her dad's permission. Well, she's been emancipated from that. There's a stage where self-government steps in, married to another person, living in a different place, paying your own bills, whatever you think it is, and you're picking up the driving privileges of your life. But the residual good that you have gotten from your children is they will always honor you. And if they honor you as you age yourself into some drooling sack of charm, they will care for you. You don't want to be resting on your command and control for that to happen. You want to rest on their honor of you. I have a little list of 4 things here at the bottom of 14. What we clarify for our child. The child is incompletely human. Okay? Lord loves them. Jesus died for them. You can't murder them. All sorts of things apply. All things but they're not your equal. They're incompletely human. The child will be completely human one day. This is not just different, but a better condition. To be governing who's the governor is a better condition than not governing. And consequently, the current adults are better than they are. That's why when you have adults around and the little kids are being, not everything they ought to be, you try to, the adults are talking. You need to be silent. You need to wait to come up and touch me and say, please, Father, can I have a word for you at the moment? You want your kids to understand that the big people are better than they are. And they call them by dignified names, Mr. So-and-so. Or if it's a close family thing, it's Mr. Evan. But it's Mr. because it's not because they're taller. It's because they're better. And you want that kind of, like with a sanctity, just like you want real Christianity, you want a real, not imposed, but granted higher and lower quality in your human interactions. Better in this situation, I've fought this fight for decades. And with dear Christian conservative friends who don't use that term. Do not say better. People aren't better than one another. That's exactly what they are. They're better than some people are better than other people. Just like you'd be better at tennis. I don't know. I'm not. Better at golf. Better at making money. better at inventing things because we know what the standard is for the thing. Tennis player. We know what the standard is for being human. It's the degree of self-government. If you govern yourself to that degree, you're human. Someone better at that is a better human. And they demonstrate that by being in charge of things, because they can not just govern themselves, they can govern the business, or govern the family, or govern the church situation. They are your better. And sometimes your better is more wicked than you are. You're supposed to honor the emperor. He was pretty bad. But you honor the emperor because he's governing all of Rome. It's what government brings to you in this situation. I have another couple of quotes here on page 15 from Lewis, and there is an element of definition that Lewis takes on himself, and I'm willing to, genuflect in his direction on these things. But also from Preface to Paradise Lost, when he's still talking about the hierarchical conception and what happens when you misalign your thought regarding this. He says, the greatest statement of the hierarchical conception is its double reference to civil and cosmic life is perhaps the speech of Ulysses in Shakespeare's Troilus. Its special importance lies in its clear statement of the alternative to hierarchy. If you take degree away, each thing meets in mere repugnancy. Strength will be lord. Everything will include itself in power. In other words, the modern idea that we can choose between hierarchy and equality is, for Shakespeare's Ulysses, mere moonshine. The real alternative is tyranny. If you will not have authority, you will find yourself obeying brute force. Now, jumping a little bit later in the essay, if once the conception of hierarchy is fully grasped, we see that order can be destroyed in two ways. One, by ruling or obeying natural equals, that is, by tyranny or servility. Two, by failing to obey a natural superior or to rule in a natural inferior, that is, by rebellion or remissness. And these, whether they are monstrosities of equal guilt or no, are equally monstrosities. Now, I know Lewis is very lucid, very clear, packed. You have 4 words: tyranny, servility, rebellion, and remissness. I recommend you hold those. Work that out in your mind as to what promotes those tragedies. This is how the hierarchical conception, when it fails to do the thing, is ruined. Because the rule of equals, by failing to, by one, ruling or obeying natural equals. You go to this is back in the day, your Blockbuster video, with a group of friends pick out a video. Some self-appointed god of the company says, we're going to watch this. And everybody else is looking at him like, who died and made you king? You're trying to rule your natural, and if he starts to get loud, he might get the video if he just makes it really, really uncomfortable for everybody. If he threatens you, if he throws you on the floor, do you need a place to sit? There's a chair right here. Okay. That what happens, and this is something I've used a lot in counseling parents who have allowed equality to be presumed in the family, is that they don't realize when it's presumed in the family. They always think, well, I'm the parent and they're the child. But they didn't, you might say, husband it. If the child believes you're equals, they will view your authority as tyrannical. Okay? And then it's righteous for them to resist you. So if you believe you're their equal, but you still want to have your way, you have to, ramp up all the discipline, the punishments. You have to make it sting, really make it hurt. because you don't have the natural discipline of hierarchy conveying the oughtness of their obedience. You're trying to overrule the oughtness of their disobedience. And in some cases, you're successful. They can create families where the natural equals are successfully ruling, but they get it by servility in the child. Is tyranny or servility? You get this error of what happens in equal. They're submitting way before they should, at least in terms of their measurement. It's not always true or false about it. It's about whether they measure it as having height or not. If a husband is walking all over his wife, or probably better at walking all over a friend who's his equal, and the friend is always obsequiously submitting, it's servility. It's just you're not enjoying the fruits of social arrangement and the nature of power structures. And the same is true with rebellion or remissness, that failing to obey a natural superior or failing to rule a natural inferior, you've been remiss, you haven't picked up your job, or you're shaking your fist at heaven. And that only happens when you, what does it say, raise your hand against the Lord's anointed. Now, that kind of clarity, and I turn to Lewis for that, he's able to pose basic political theory and every other kind of authority in these areas, and you go, yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. So if I don't get back to the hierarchical conception, everything is going to meet in mere repugnancy. It's who can knock who out. Because you will have to have something that drives things forward, and it's going to be violence. It's when you don't have government, or you might say restrained or just violence, you get unjust violence. So having these ideas clear in your own thinking, that when you get if you get an insubordinate word from your child, and you talk to your spouse about, little Johnny was kind of full of himself today and giving me some back chat. And then you can start to say, okay, we need to be sure that we start to communicate what it is to be their superior, so that they are nationally disciplined by the presence of a superior. And I have you might say the pulpit, the vantage point where I can speak with authority to it. Now, it's not because we're trying to go back in time to Your Father Knows Best or a couple centuries earlier about, well, families used to be, and it's Little House on the Prairie, and Dad was always admired. And we know we've watched Disney films make fools of fathers, but we started with rebelling against our king. Just saying. Shouldn't have done that, because you basically make a god out of independence, and you teach your kids about independence and rebelling against the king in school, Christian school, and make it almost a righteous act that they would rebel against their God-given authorities, and then wonder what happened at home when they rebelled against their God-given authorities. Well, because you're tyrants. Look like George III. But we need to be finding something that will bring in the position of height to your affection, your discipline, your Christianity in the home. Height is you might say, a hidden player. You don't have to be talking about it all the time. Especially, you don't want to talk about it all the time as if talking about it was creating it. No, you got to you have to believe it, and then you have to live by it. And part of it, in living by it, there is a quality of style of life, just little things. One of the basic things we encourage you to think is that you are disciplining your children not so that they'll be good children, but they won't, so that they won't be in your way. You got stuff to do. You're an adult. You got a life. You got a job. You got a home to clean. And little Johnny shouldn't be. The discipline is to keep him from being chaos where you are trying to establish order. And in that responsibility, I'm not, I know I just said we don't care about what little Johnny turns out like, but we care because this is what God has given us to produce in them. But you, in your expression of it, there ought to be a degree of, we're not here for everything you want to do. And I'm not here as a menu where I, as a parent, am always selecting what my kids are going to want to do. And I'm going to, it's the helicopter parenting thing, driving everywhere for my kids all the time. Because my time's too important. My wife's time is too important. And when they would come into the kitchen, Leslie would be cooking, because that's what she does. And Mother, would you read me a book? Because they call us Mother and Father, because that's the way it should be. Mother, would you read us a book? And Leslie would say, very kindly, but very, I'm working on something right now. I'll be done in about 45 minutes. Then we can sit down and read a book. Kid goes, okay. Off they go, learning to defer gratification, and that they found out that what Mother is doing is more important than her sitting with me reading Dr. Seuss. Communicating in circumstances the importance of the adult. It could be just these slight things.
I'll give some examples of things that I did were, if your child comes in and says, I'm hungry, they're simply announcing to you their need or their state, but they haven't addressed you as someone better. They need to say, may I have something to eat? Or would you get me something to eat? And then I'm hungry after that. But the simple announcement is almost them commanding you to get them something. And I never let my kids get away with that. And it took years of saying, oh, really? So you're hungry? Well, that's not how you get something. You know, and teaching them, you need to say, Mother, would you get me a snack, a drink? And then the other thing Evan addressed a little bit earlier about how you instruct your children to address adults, other adults. Do you just tell them the first name and your children get to call all the adults that you know by their first name? Or do you say, this is, say to a single person, this is Miss Emily, this is Miss Hannah, or Mr. Tristan, or Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson. And I think a lot of parents, when their kids are really tiny and just learning to talk, they feel like that's just too much of a mouthful. They're not going to be able to say that. So they simplify it down to the thing that eventually just puts them on even footing with the adults by saying their first name. Give them the whole thing. They will eventually be able to say it. That's why we went with the mother and father when all of our friends were going mama, papa, because they would get mama and papa much quicker than our kids were able to say mother or father. But our kids eventually did it, and we liked how it sounded.
And it's not, that's not a, we don't want to undercut the dearness of, we're grandparents now, and other grandparents we mock pretty regularly for being meemaw or other stupid, because they love it so much. Well, it's tender, it's close, you know. But we waited till our grandchildren could say grandfather and grandma. You know, she likes being grandma, I like being grandfather, and they've got to work out grandfather. And I was gray paw for a while, but it was always corrected. No, it's grandfather, not gray paw. Now, though as apt as it was. But I think that each of these, of course, your own choice, but recognize the child is building a world in an evaluative circumstance out of all the signal they get. And do you give a signal at all of one, your humility before God, your boss, your government, where they learn what it is to be humble before someone better than they, what it is to obey someone because they're more important than you and they're in charge of you. Do they see that in the father? Do they see that in the mother? The mother has a great opportunity. This is out of 1 Peter, where Peter recommends that you imitate Sarah, because as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do likewise, let nothing terrify you. Now stop and think that in your romance with your spouse, and I'm sure it's very romantic, what value can you imagine, and I'm not suggesting this, don't rush the table, calling your husband Lord? Now, my wife doesn't call me Lord. We're not saying that this be really biblical. But the honorific was present. And then you have to say, do I ever speak to my husband honorifically in front of my children? Do I operate in front of my children like I understand what his leadership in the home is, so that they understand that this woman I admire, who disciplines me during the day, she's under that. They're measuring everything. And they will find and try to divide you from one another, because that's the nature of children's sea lawyering. But if you're knowing what you're doing, you're not just winging it informally, whatever you think of saying. You're thinking what's reasonable, what's authoritative, and you're bringing up the rear with passion. You don't live by these passions, because you will start saying things or speaking unduly or disrespectfully of your betters, whether it's a wife of her husband or a child of its parent. If you don't want it in the kids, don't do it in your life. Do the opposite in your life. And this is something that we don't see anyone, because the whole society believes in equality. You got to overcome that, and then you got to figure out a path or a language or the way you live. You do live this way in certain moments, just like the teenager at the Alice Cooper concert, but you are going to need to have a path that doesn't have these definitions of servility and tyranny automatically landing in your kid's lap because you gave them equality and then you got bossy. Well, you thought, well, I gotta stop them from doing things. Well, you taught them you were their equal, and now he's the same height. He can take you in a fight. And that's what sometimes people think. They end up fathers and sons fighting one another because that's what they got left with when they didn't measure their kids' standing well enough. And I have this comment at the end that you've raised your child's self-esteem instead of raising their esteem of you. Now, just like when I said that, do they call you really religious or really good? You want them to call you really good. But they're also, I always attach to my father's memory, he was a great godly man. He's not just a godly man, he was a great godly man. Because he was my father, always above me, military household, but all the graces that came from that were present. There was never any difficult drill sergeant equality to it. So that's something that we want to encourage you to consider. Go back and read through it. If you get a chance of reading his essay on membership, I skipped over that, but it has to do with the legal fiction of equality that we have created in our society that is good for law, but not good measurement of the world. People thought something good for law was true about them, so they think they're your equal, or you are their equal. Either you downgrade yourself or you upgrade yourself, but you're not. Measure yourself truly, know who you are as a parent and as a guide to the blind, and they will start to pick up on it. And if you discipline them for that insubordination, they begin to see the cost in it. Well, that is...
I just want to say, regarding the mama papa thing, I didn't want to make it sound like you're some sort of wrong for choosing that. I'm just saying that we decided to choose mother and father even though we had to wait longer for our kids to say it. So feel free to be mama, papa, mommy, daddy, whatever.
We know what to think of you. And you find something like that where you can say, we're doing this because it's an honorific. We want to find some way. Well, I'll give the illustration of that passage in Peter. I was talking to a liberal evangelical woman pastor in that room over there years ago. And she was convinced and had heard much of my misogyny. And we were friends and a good conversation. So I asked her at some point in the conversation what she did with that passage in Peter, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do likewise. And she said, well, I think it's archaic. I said, yeah, like I said, my wife could not do it without laughing. But so what term of honor do you use for your husband that's not archaic? Well, she didn't have one. It wasn't that she hated archaicisms. She didn't have a voice of honor for her husband. Now, it's hard to find one in our language. You know,
Sirs.
my father always recommended sir, you know, and it's true. It's not archaic. It's just not done. Think about it. Think about it in terms of how do you speak to one another in front of the children, where a wife really recognizes this is a lesson for my children. This is not merely me doing the right thing performatively, but I want my kids to see the reverence in which I hold my husband. That they hear it from me when he's not around. I speak in that way when he is around, because this is guiding huge things in your struggles, that even when they get into a sin pattern at some point that you're trying to work through as a kind of a crisis in the family, and when you can fall back on their honor of you. You know, I know that my kids, I had strict views about pastors having obedient children or believing children. And I held myself to that standard with my father, and my kids held it there. They knew that I would leave the ministry for what they were doing. And that kind of thing, and they knew that would be a dishonor they could not live with. They were busy disobeying me. They were busy disobeying God. But the failure to honor the family head who would give up his job because of the way they were behaving. Those are things that you realize both in good and bad circumstances, you have remedy in the fact that they would think, "O king, live forever," instead of "up yours, old man." Well, that is it for lesson number 2. It is 11:15.
Questions?
Oh, yeah, there could be questions, I guess. Hey, Taylor.
For a set of parents that have not set a tone in their home of authority or authority structure between them, what is a starting point other than changing how they address each other or how a child addresses them? What's a starting point practically to change that tone in your home?
Actual obedience to authorities in your life, like the centurion says, "I am one set under authority," that his soldiers that obey him knew he obeyed, the generals. That father going off to work faithfully, not given, I'm just going a little bit late. They don't worry about that. Where it shows the dignity of command in his life. The mother the same way about the dignity of others. When when we're constantly moving through, say, our shopping day at the grocery store, and certain financial gains might be grasped at that we're not quite honest, where you're costing a business something because you're taking an advantage, or line behavior, checkout line behavior, where other people are less than you because, well, if I get my cart into line and then go find the peanut butter I forgot. We have a rule in our home because I push the cart usually. So I'm left hanging there. He said, it's not going into the line. You're not going to have any gain over any other person's until you get everything in the cart you want, and I'll wait off to the back because you're demonstrating your honor of your fellow man. Are you functioning not just love and the like, but also honoring their day, honoring their obligations? How you speak to the people who work for you, how you speak to a checker in front of your kids or in the cart. They're being idiots, and you speak reverently to people. One, they will hear it and put it away. And I used to call my boss at the newspaper, the publisher, sir. And he forbade me from doing it. And I said, no, sir. We said, well, we're all here a team at this business. And I said, no, we're not. You signed my check. And you could fire me. I can't fire you. He said, okay, you can call me sir. Now, he liked it from the beginning, but he thought it wasn't American and egalitarian, even though he was signing my check and could fire me. Now, those are things that you sort of start implementing the idea, and I'm mentioning a few things that are vocal, but you have far more opportunities than you realize that when you start with a checker and you find out that her name is Judith, and you introduce Judith to your son in the cart, little Johnny, this is Miss Judith. He starts to recognize this is the pattern. These are the patterns, these are the markers, and you function that way. You're not looking to cheat other people or disrespect your husband by not quite doing what he wanted. You knew he wanted that, and you knew you found a way not to do that. Well, your husband's in charge. If you want your kids, I've told this to a number of mothers, obey your husband in such a way that you want your kids to obey you. That's simple as that. That if you want little Johnny to say, yes, ma'am, on the way up, when you said jump, joyfully, right? You want little Johnny to go, yes, mother, I would be happy to take the garbage out. You want that? Well, then give that. You don't get to be the queen of the universe alone and everybody obeying you. Do the obedience, and that helps a lot.
I have a funny story to tell about my eldest. When he was not yet potty trained, and I thought he was way too big to not be potty trained. And one day I was cleaning up the diaper, really messy diaper, and here's this large child lying on the changing table. And I was probably in a pretty bad state over it. And I was just chewing him out while I'm cleaning his rear. And he finally looked at me and he said, Mother, just bug off. So I remember turning my head and spurting out a laugh because it was so funny to me. And then turned back to him and said, Davis, don't you ever say that to me again. But
he didn't turn out as a son.
So there was just this recognition of I had been bad, I deserved it, but he wasn't the one really that should correct me. So I got the laugh, and then I got to correct him.
Any other questions? Okay.